The wind screaming over the Kunlun Mountains was a sound that got inside a man's skull. It wasn't just cold, it was a cold that bit through the layers of advanced tactical gear, turning sweat to ice and making the steel of a rifle feel like it would bond with the skin if touched for too long. For the 6 men of SEAL Team 3, hunkered down in the jagged teeth of a ridgeline overlooking the Shushan Pass, this was about as far from the warm Pacific waters of home as a man could get. And their mission, a joint training and observation op with a Pakistani Special Operations Unit, had gone sideways in the worst possible way. A routine patrol to verify a high-altitude insertion point had turned into a desperate race for survival when they'd stumbled upon a well-organized insurgent force moving heavy ordnance through a valley the satellite imagery had marked as clear. The firefight that followed had been brutal and chaotic, and they'd taken casualties. 2 of their Pakistani counterparts were down, and the LT had a gash on his arm from a ricochet that had shattered against the rock. They'd fought, they'd moved, and now they were trapped. The only way down from the mountain was through the Shushan Pass, a narrow, wind-scoured saddle of rock that sat 1,000 yards below their current position. And the enemy, whoever the hell they were, knew it. They had a heavy machine gun nest dug in on the far side of the pass, a PKM, that could chew up the entire team the second they showed themselves on the exposed trail. The chatter on the radio was a mess of panicked Pashto and Dari, but the gist was clear. They were waiting. They had the team pinned, and with the weather closing in, time was a luxury they didn't have. The mission commander, a lieutenant with the call sign Viper, was already on the sat phone, his voice a low, controlled growl as he tried to coordinate an extraction that he knew, deep down, it wasn't coming. Not tonight. Not with this storm. They were on their own. It was in this frozen purgatory that the argument began. The team's senior sniper, a man named Kale, a master chief with a face carved from the same stone as the mountain, was arguing with their attached liaison, a woman who went by the call sign Ghost. She wasn't officially part of the teams. She was Devgru, a sniper from a sister command, attached for this specific mission because of her legendary skill set. Her file was so redacted it looked like a puzzle, and the rumors that followed her were even more fragmented. They said she'd made shots in Helmand that defied physics, that she'd once taken out a high-value target from a distance so great the round took nearly 4 seconds to hit, a fact that had made even the old-timers at Dam Neck go quiet. But to Kale, right now, she was just a complication. Her spotter, a wiry kid named Ruiz, had set up her gear, a custom-built AI chassis Macmillan TAC-50, though a weapon that looked more like a piece of NASA hardware than a rifle. She was proposing a firing solution that was, by any conventional metric, insane. The enemy machine gun nest was nearly 2 miles away as the crow flies. But the shot wasn't just long, it was impossibly complex. The wind was a katabatic nightmare, howling down from the peaks, creating vortices and currents that would change a bullet's flight path by feet, not inches. The angle was severe, shooting down from their high perch. And the target itself was just a dark slit between boulders. "Forget her, LT," Kyle had growled, his voice muffled by his balaclava, his eyes fixed on Ghost through the frozen air. "We don't have time for fairy tales. We need to find another way down now, while we still have light. We can't wait for a magic bullet." He didn't say it, but the distrust was palpable. It wasn't just about the shot. It was about everything. And the teams were a brotherhood forged in fire and sweat and shared suffering. They'd bled together for years. And here was this woman, this quiet, unnervingly calm figure with eyes the color of glacial ice, who seemed to exist outside of that. She hadn't said 2 words to him the entire op. She just observed, calculated, and remained utterly, infuriatingly still. He saw her as an unknown, a variable he couldn't control, and in his world, uncontrolled variables got people killed. Ghost didn't even look at him. She was peering through her scope, her gloved fingers adjusting the turrets on her scope with tiny, precise movements. "The wind at the target is steady at 17 knots, left to right," she said, her voice as flat and calm as if she were ordering coffee. "The thermal layer between us and them is going to push the round right. I need a 3-degree offset on the scope and a 2 mil hold for elevation." 17 knots? Ruiz sputtered, his teeth chattering. Ma'am, the anemometer at our position is gusting to 40. How can you—" "Because the target isn't at our position," she replied, cutting him off. It wasn't rude, it was just a fact. She was operating on a different plane of understanding. Kyle stepped closer, his body radiating frustration. "Master Chief, with all due respect, this is a waste of time. That's a 3,200-meter shot. In these conditions, it's never been done. We need to move." Finally, she looked at him. Her gaze was unsettling. And there was no ego in it, no challenge, just a cold, implacable certainty that he found more unnerving than any amount of anger. "Master Chief, with all due respect," she said, her tone a perfect, icy mirror of his own. "The only reason you're still breathing to argue with me is because that nest is still there. If we move, we die. If I shoot, we might live. Those are the only two variables. Now, if you want to find another way, by all means, take your team. But I'm going to clear the pass." She turned back to her scope, leaving Kyle standing there, speechless. Viper, the LT, just gave Kyle a tired look and shook his head. He'd read Ghost's file. He knew what she was capable of, even if his team didn't. "Give her the window, Kyle," he said quietly. "Let her work." The next 10 minutes were the longest of Kyle's life. He watched as Ghost and Ruiz prepared. Ruiz, despite his shivering, was a meticulous professional. He pulled out a handheld Kestrel weather meter, but Ghost shook her head. She didn't need the real-time data from their position. Instead, she had him use the integrated ballistics computer linked to her scope, feeding it data from a secondary laser rangefinder that was painting the target area, not the nest itself. She was building a model of the air between them, piece by piece. She would look through her scope for long minutes, then close her eyes, and her lips moving silently as if she were reciting a prayer. But Kale realized with a jolt that she wasn't praying. She was calculating. She was visualizing the arc of the bullet, feeling the wind currents she couldn't see, compensating for the spin of the Earth, the Coriolis effect, that would drag around over such a distance. It was a symphony of physics and math, all playing out in the silence of her mind. The insurgents in the nest, sensing their advantage, would occasionally rake the ridgeline with a burst of fire, the rounds whining off the rocks a few hundred yards above the team's position. Each burst was a reminder of their vulnerability. Each burst made Kale's hand twitch towards his own rifle. But he held. He watched her. Finally, Ghost settled into position. She didn't just lie down. She flowed into the rock, becoming one with it. She adjusted the bipod, then the rear bag under the stock. She took a breath, then let half of it out, or her body went completely still, the only movement the slight flutter of her eyelashes in the biting wind. Her finger, bare despite the cold, rested on the trigger. She wasn't squeezing, she was just waiting, feeling the pulse in her own finger, waiting for the exact micro-moment between heartbeats when her body was at its absolute steadiest. Down in the pass, Kyle could see the enemy position through his own scope. Out it was just a blurry smudge of dark gray against the lighter gray of the rock. There was no way, no possible way. And then the world shattered. The crack of the .50 caliber round was deafening, a physical blow that echoed off the surrounding peaks. But it was the sound a second and a half later that made everyone hold their breath, the distant, almost gentle thump of the bullet striking home. Kyle watched through his scope. For a moment, nothing. Then, a puff of dark smoke, a spray of debris, and the unmistakable sight of the PKM's barrel tipping skyward as its gunner slumped over it. A second later, a figure scrambled out from behind the rocks, and another round from Ghost's rifle sent him diving for cover, not to rise again. Silence. An absolute, ringing silence fell over the mountain, broken only by the wind. The pass was clear. Kyle stared, his mind refusing to process what his eyes had just seen. He looked at the data on his own rangefinder, at the numbers he hadn't wanted to believe. 3,247 meters, over 2 miles. A shot that would be talked about in sniper schools for a century, made in a gale force wind, from a position of extreme stress, to save a team that had openly doubted her. Ghost was already on her feet, breaking down her rifle with the same calm, efficient movements she'd used to set it up. She didn't look at the nest. She didn't look for congratulations. She caught Kyle's eye for a single, fleeting moment. And there was no triumph there, no, "I told you so," just the same flat, professional acknowledgement of a job done. She gave him a single, curt nod. That was all. A flush of heat, hotter than any adrenaline, washed over Kyle. It was shame. Pure, unadulterated shame. He had judged her. He had dismissed her based on nothing more than his own prejudice and the comfortable familiarity of his all-male world. He had called her a variable, a risk, and she had responded not with anger, but with the one thing that mattered: action. She had answered his doubt with a 3,247-meter bullet. The extraction, when it finally came via a daring low-level helicopter insertion as the storm broke, was a blur. But on the helicopter, as they roared away from the mountains, Cale found himself sitting across from her. She was staring out the open door, her face illuminated by the dull red of the cabin lights. He leaned forward, his voice almost lost in the roar of the rotors. "Shh, Ghost." She turned to him, her glacial eyes questioning. He didn't know what to say. Sorry was a word for a different world. It was too small, too civilian. He just met her gaze, held it, and gave her a slow, deliberate nod of respect. The kind of nod one warrior gives another when words are useless. She looked at him for a long moment, then a tiny, almost imperceptible change occurred in her expression. The ice thawed, just a fraction. It wasn't a smile, but it was an acceptance. She gave a small nod in return, then turned back to the night sky. Cale leaned back in his webbed seat, the vibration of the helicopter humming through his bones.